Welcome everyone to this webinar. We are very delighted to welcoming so many people. This webinar is based on insights and best practices from our recently launched Venture Client Report. We launched it in April 23. And today we want to put a little bit more emphasis on how to enhance the strategic benefit with excellent venture clienting. So we want to show you some best practices and insights on how to bring your venture clienting activities to the next level. And we therefore provided some really good insights, I think, for you that are pretty much hands-on. All right, who are we? I'm here with the 27 Pilots founder, Gregor Gimme, and we can briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, yeah. Good morning. Delighted to see so many people interested in the topic. I'm Gregor. I'm the founder and CEO of 27 Pilots. I spent many years in Silicon Valley, where I learned a lot about startups, venture capital, venturing, and so on. After Silicon Valley, I joined BMW, where I worked from 2012 to 2018. There's where I came up with and coined the term venture client, created and launched the world's first venture client unit, the BMW Startup Garage, which I think today is the reference venture client unit for many other venture client units that have emerged since. And since 2018, I work at 27 Pilots.
All right, then I'm going to continue here. My name is Sebastian Schäfer. I'm leading the strategy and structure squad at 27 Pilots, meaning how we set up venture client units at new clients, but also scale venture client units at existing clients. And previously to 27 Pilots, I was a student at Stanford University, really being at the core of the startup ecosystem and diving deep into that. And yeah, Gregor, do you want to spend some words on our academic partners for the study?
Yeah, since the very beginning, when I was still working at BMW, I saw the need and the importance of involving the world of academia into researching and through that advancing the venture client process model, best practices around it. So since the early days in BMW and now also with 27 Pilots, we've kept the engagement with leading universities and the partners who participated in this research. The state of venture client are the European Business School, the ETH Zurich, INSEAD Business School, and Universität Passau, and also the WHU in Koblenz. So thanks to those universities for your contribution.
All right, and then we're going to come quickly to our agenda, what we're going to do today and what we're going to present to you guys. So Gregor will introduce like the venture client model and also its origins and how he coined the term. Then we will come to some definitions that I will introduce based on the venture client report that we launched and with some insights based on those statistics. Then we also came up with some venture client levels so that you can put yourself really in the shoes of where you are in your venture client unit journey. And lastly, we're going to close the session with some best practices for each of those levels so that you really can boost your venture client unit and bring it to the next level. And of course, there will be some time for a Q&A. So feel free to shoot us some questions in the Q&A or previously in the chat so that we can take them up accordingly. All right. And with that being said, we'll dive into that. And I hand over to Gregor for some first introduction slides.
All right. Well, whenever you talk about venture clienting, it's important, and as you do this also in your companies, to remind your audience about the relevance and the importance of startups, because that's why we build venture client units to leverage startups, because they are becoming, or they are a critical resource of competitive advantage. And we're seeing that today for more and more companies, really for any corporations. And we also would like to stress that it's beyond a resource for innovation, as startups do not only contribute their technologies to bring out new business models or better products. They're also critical for processes in manufacturing, in IT, in logistics, in HR, so really across the value chain. And on the right, you see we pictured some of very impactful relationships between corporates and startups that made a huge impact on the corporate. So, for example, just to pick the first, Pfizer, when they established a partnership with BioNTech before COVID and before BioNTech went public in 2018, through the BioNTech technology that you all know of and probably have running in your blood, Pfizer made an additional 35 billion in revenue. Apple in 1984 made a partnership with a small garage-based startup called Adobe, and that partnership allowed Apple to become the leader in desktop publishing, which was a multi-billion-dollar market way back when in the 80s. And I think these days everybody's talking about ChatGPT. And you can already see that the partnership between Microsoft and ChatGPT has boosted the usage of Bing by 15%. So put that in numbers. So startups are critical for competitive advantage, and this is really the basis and why we have venture client units and why it's important to be good at venture clienting. Mm-hmm. All right, so what is venture clienting? So here's a chart we're using to visualize not only what venture client is, but also the difference to corporate venture capital and to accelerators. What you see is in the middle a startup, and the startup has one product, and the goal and the basis for achieving a benefit, a strategic benefit, meaning a better process, a better product, less cost, more revenue, is by bringing this technology into the value chain of a company, putting it into a product, into a process, just by using, really being a client, and we call this a venture client, a user of the startup technology, you gain an immediate strategic benefit. A corporate venture capitalist primary transaction is buying a minority non-controlling stake of a startup. So it's really a pre-step towards adopting a product, because the VC, the corporate VC, will never use a startup technology, correct? He first invests and then he tries to bring that technology to the corporate. So here we have an equity transaction. In venture clienting, we have a technology transaction. And the accelerators are generally not a technology transaction. There are no equity transaction either. It's basically just a getting to know each other. It's kind of like a front end before you engage with startups. So to be good at venture clienting and to be able to scale the adoption of startups and to be able to serve the whole company and various strategic purposes, and given also the complexity of the global startup ecosystem, it's important to establish a unit, an organizational entity that is dedicated, has dedicated resources, processes, a team that conducts only venture client activities. And that's what we mean by venture client unit. So a company can be a venture client without a venture client unit, but if you really want to boost your benefit from startups, that's where a venture client unit becomes a critical element in your organization. So why about this research? Well, we see there's lots of research around the supply side in the startup ecosystem. So startups and investors, so the people who create new technologies, who fund new technologies. But we see a research gap on the demand side for startup technology. That's really missing, and that's when we thought about, it's really this going into companies that buy and use startup technology that acquire startups. So who's researching that part of the startup ecosystem? We saw a big gap here, and this is the reason why we launched the State of Venture Client Research and Report, and we intend to do this every year. Just as a note, this report and this research has been conducted globally, and we both look not only at the companies who use and buy startup technology for strategic purposes, we also look at the startups in how they describe and how they evaluate their relationships with their venture clients. So we get data from both parts, which we think makes us report very solid.
All right. And based on this report, we would like to provide you with some key definitions that we actually asked also the participating companies as well as startups. And one of the first questions, and I think that's also maybe a pressing question for you, is what actually is a startup? And we have surveyed the companies, and 65% of them say age of a company defines a startup. Some say venture capital funding. They say founded by entrepreneurs, not companies, 53%. They have a lean organizational structure and scalability of their solution. They have a revenue growth as a goal. They have a certain creativity of the team. Product readiness, 24%. The existence of IP, 18%. And some other attributes to define a startup. And I think what's crucial here to emphasize is that I think, and that's also maybe stereotypical, that most surveyed companies still define a startup by the age of a company. Whereas we see like product readiness as well as the existence of IP, like intellectual property, for example, in the form of patents, is relatively low scored among surveyed companies. And this is actually one of the crucial attributes we associate with a startup when we conduct venture clienting activities. So here's our definition that we apply across different venture client units. And of course, here we must say that the definition of startups varies also across sectors. But this is one that we use, as I said, throughout different venture clienting activities. So there we say a startup is defined as a non-listed private company, meaning it's pre-IPO. It's not publicly listed on the stock market. It's still private, founded by its founding entrepreneurs, meaning also like a dedicated expert team that put in its expertise. And they solve strategically relevant problems with a scalable product. And I think this relates perfectly to what we saw in the State of Venture Client report, that a scalable product, meaning that it's not about consulting or any service solutions. We look at startups particularly that have a ready-made product, and that's scalable. And that's coming along with protected intellectual property, as I said, for example, in the form of patents and patented algorithms. And this is crucial because this is the key strategic benefit that a venture client could gain. It's not about like inventing something in-house, which might take like 2 years, or coming up with new patents yourself. It's a technology that's outside of your company that you could leverage. Startups also are VC fundable, and that's a key quality criteria for us when evaluating different startups, in which series funding stage they are, which investors they have. However, this is not generally a definition of startups. We also left out here age of a company, as this is not a defining attribute. We rather look at like if they have, for example, raised recent funding, if they are more than 10 years, for example. Coming to another definition and terminology is venture client itself. So we ask the surveyed venture clients and startups, do you use actually venture clienting in your company, or have you ever heard about this term? And I think here we also see a differentiation between startups and venture clients. So most venture clients have heard about this term, venture clienting. However, it's not used within their company. And on the other hand, we see that startups have never heard about venture clienting, although it is a key potential sales channel for them. So a unified venture client terminology is missing, and we hope to raise more awareness about venture clienting in the future. And you might wonder what actually is a venture client. So it's as Gregor said, a company that purchases and uses startup solutions with the purpose of obtaining a strategic benefit. You can also look that up in Wikipedia. And you also can see here that when we surveyed the venture clients in our survey, that every company has at least once bought from a startup. So every company is basically a venture client if they have at least once bought from a startup. And this is also the case definitely here in our State of Venture Client report. And with that, we want to introduce you to different venture client levels. And this will be done by Gregor in the next section.
Right. So yes, we just saw that every company that buys from a startup is a venture client. Whether you know that this is a startup or not, whether you do it consciously or subconsciously, it doesn't matter. You're still a venture client. And now, but obviously there are different, let's say, levels of venture clients. And here we defined a spectrum around the level of institutionalization. So what we see is many, many informal venture clients that conduct informal venture client activities, like, for example, BMW in 1996, when they established relationships with startups in Silicon Valley, or in 2001 with Google, or in 2002 with Mobileye, correct? Those are informal venture client activities. There's no dedicated process, resource, or decision systems. At the other end of the spectrum is a high level of institutionalization, and this is when a company decides to establish a dedicated unit with a dedicated process, with a brand, with budget, KPIs, and so forth. And those types of companies are, for example, a BMW or an Open Bosch. The level of institutionalization, as we have seen in this report and over the years, has a strong impact on the strategic benefit you can generate from startups. And the strategic impact we define as around profit and revenue that you generate through startup technology. The strategic impact is also a function of the number of assessed topics or problems that you're solving, that you're learning from, where your company is advancing, and with that number of problems, that's how we define the strategic impact. And when we cluster the different types of companies, we put them into three levels by the level of institutionalization and by strategic impact. So what we see is that the companies with informal venture client activities level 1, they have low level of institutionalization, but they also have a low level of impact, right? They conduct activities with not so good startups, with few startups. Many times those relationships end up not generating any impact or low impact. On the level 2, we see that some companies start to institutionalize venture client activities. For example, often we see companies that have a corporate venture capital unit that has, a team of people who is dedicated around, establishing partnerships for the invested portfolio startups. Here we see a stronger strategic impact, but not much stronger. Sometimes we even see that the strategic impact decreases from a level 1. And where we see the highest strategic impact is at dedicated venture client units, which is then the level 3. In terms of numbers, obviously level number 1, if we look at all companies with over $1 billion revenue worldwide, which are over 10,000, so obviously 99%, a big percentage is in level 1. We see some around 1,000 to 1,500 venture client, level 2 venture clients. Those are, as said, those kind of partnership teams within CVCs or within accelerators or within the innovation departments. And then we see a growing number of dedicated venture client units, really on a global basis, not just around Germany or Central Europe, but also, for example, in countries as far away as Chile, that is establishing dedicated venture client units. And that number is growing, and we foresee that number to grow, especially taking away from the number of companies in level 2.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, we also launched a poll here in the chat. So feel free to put in where you see yourself in this venture client journey, level 1 to level 3. So we would be interested in that. That's of course anonymized, and we will take this up later on, also in the Q&A. Right, and then over to some best practices, and we also associate this to those different levels.
Okay, so what we are doing here is if you are in a level 1, like in the bottom left, so you are doing some venture client activities, you're not calling them such, maybe you do it out of a purchasing department, for example. What are the best practices to get from level 1 to level 3? And also important to note here, we do not recommend to go to level 2 first. We have seen many cases where companies went from level 1 to level 3 directly without going over level 2. So some of the best practices we always structure the best practice around strategy, structure, and process. So obviously your strategy needs to be from the beginning. Let's build a dedicated venture client unit as a strategic vehicle that solves pressing problems for your company. And even though that unit can be small and needs to grow organically, that needs to be the first really, that needs to be the strategic vision. And we've seen that this works at big companies like a BMW or Bosch or Siemens, but it also works at very small companies, as we're seeing, for example, in Spain, with companies that have around 100 million in venture client in revenue. Structure, always important to establish a clear set of roles and responsibilities. So, for example, define a head of venture client unit, define a venture client manager, really use also this terminology to define your job positions in your structure and process. Apply and use a proven venture client model. When I did this way back when, in 2014, 15 at BMW, there was nothing, correct? Basically, I had to invent myself something and then iterate, and especially with 27 pilots, we could iterate on the process with over 20 companies. And there is already some processes and models around that have proof of working. And this is what we're seeing as establishing as a best practice, where you have a core process that combines startup intelligence, finding out about startups, the next, really having a deep insight into what's happening in the startup ecosystem, then finding the right startups, validating them through a pilot, and then going into the adoption through a partnership or an M&A transaction. And that always has to be supported through a continuous evolving strategy, continuous evolving structure. You also need to work on your culture, which is mainly driven by communication, branding, promoting the reason why a venture client unit is there for the company, and also to build on strong technology and data to run your venture client operations.
All right, then coming from level 2 to 3, so meaning you have like a certain level of institutionalization, also in terms of like corporate venturing. Maybe you have like certain venture client activities running under a certain umbrella, and you can also boost that to what we call the level 3, meaning a dedicated venture client unit with dedicated branding, as Gregor said, technology, startup intelligence, and to boost really the strategic impact of startups in your organization. Also here, some best practices that evolve around leveraging from level 2 to level 3. So boost yourself to level 3 by not talking about like a certain startup partnering activity. Instead, talk about competitiveness, because you will miss out on critical innovations that happen outside of your company, and you need to have like a dedicated vehicle to leverage those startup technologies, cutting edge technologies that you not have inside of your company. And this does not work via standardized partnering, where you also need to have some certain relationship in place. It's really about solving pressing issues at your company. Also, what's necessary here is to build a strong network of venture managers inside of your company. That means we talk always about a problem that a startup solves at a company, right? So it's not about being active mostly in the startup ecosystem, scanning startups everywhere around the world. This can be done, for example, via startup databases. It's about identifying those key problems that have high strategic impact by cost savings or new revenue generation, and then also apply a specific venture client software as well as data for managing and measuring and monitoring the strategic impact of startups. So we have seen that a lot of companies work, for example, with dedicated startup databases. They conduct pilot projects, but you need to have it all in one and also see how certain startups perform at your company and make your venture client unit really a key of startup competitiveness, and also to make them leverage those synergies across different business units with startups. And lastly, level 3.
So level 3. Well, once you have a venture client unit, it's not like you build it and it's done and it doesn't evolve from here. When I started the BMW Startup Garage in 2015, we were 2 people. Today it's over 20. We worked mainly for technology for the car. Today, the BMW Startup Garage provides technology across all BMW, from HR to IT, and obviously car and mobility. When I look at the first venture client units dedicated, established at Bosch, for example, BSH, Startup Kitchen was the second. Then there was Holcim Startup Maker at Holcim in Switzerland, then also Open Bosch for the overall Bosch Group. All those dedicated venture client units, there are quite different today from where they were at the start. So that department can evolve just like any department in a corporate evolves over time. It becomes better. It provides a higher impact. So what you have to do from what are some of the best practices, what we see here. So in terms of strategy, you start a venture client unit focusing on 2 or 3 areas where startups can bring an immediate impact, but you want to evolve the offering to include functions, and even functions that wouldn't even pilot a startup, but that need startup intelligence, for example, for decision making, because you as a venture client unit, you have a very strong privileged insight into the startup ecosystem. So this would be one way to increase your impact, is do not focus just on providing technology to several business units and piloting startups, but go with your offering, for example, in startup intelligence, do corporate strategy, support M&A in filling up the deal book, and that way you will have a significant impact. In terms of structure, what we're seeing is that venture client units start at the headquarters, and then they expand across regions and subsidiaries, and specifically in China, in Asian countries, and also in the United States. So what we're seeing here as an evolution is to go from one central venture client unit to a central venture client excellence center that then provides really the tools and processes and blueprints for the venture client units that then run across the world in subsidiaries with the same brand, with a different brand, but all based upon the same, venture client model. And through that, you have strong synergies, and that obviously will also boost your strategic impact on the corporates. And the last but not least, sorry, go one back. So on the process side, what we see initially is that the startup units, venture client units, focus specifically on the center part, which is really the core engine. It's driving pilots. It's finding problems, finding top startups, and then bringing those into the business units, and from there on ignite the adoption. What we see is an evolution of venture client units is to do more and more in intelligence, really become also the foresight research center, and On the adoption side, also get stronger involved into adoption. For example, when you roll out a technology on a global basis, or when you decide to acquire a startup because you want to be the sole user of startup technology.
All right, and then we have like a lot of success cases already, so that you can also look up on YouTube. For example, this Soul Robotics and Embotech case with BMW. So make sure to look them up accordingly. I think we're going to skip that for now. And with that said, this was a glimpse into the insights and best practices of the State of Venture Client Report 2023. Feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help you in becoming an excellent venture client, as we have seen, jumping from level 1 to level 3, or even further from level 3 to 3+. And we're here for your support. And if you want to learn more about the report itself and a lot more best practices, a lot more insights, feel free to scan this QR code right here. Google the State of Venture Client report that we launched in April 23. And I'm happy to answer now your questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. So feel free to shoot us any question that you would like to. I think we have around like 10 minutes for that. So yeah. Any questions from your side? I'm trying to also see the chat here. Okay. So most of you said that you are level 3 companies with 52%. Then level 2 with 24% and level 1 with 12%. Okay. There's a question, Mateusz.
Yeah, one question that I have is I have worked in plenty of like big corporations that actually had multiple innovation units, many of them working with startups. How to coordinate and create a coalition to actually drive these efforts in a corporation that is so spread out and has so decentralized way of driving innovation?
So you were saying you have you're saying that you've worked at corporations with a central innovation department?
Decentralized. So in a big corporation, how can we pool a venture client unit when you have decentralized units that are driving innovations? That is
Okay.
this something that you have faced before?
Yes, well, I initiated the BMW Startup Garage out of BMW Innovation, and BMW has also very, let's say, many innovation teams. And so the important thing is here to really get a strong C-level support at the headquarters, and to get that person to support a initial small centralized venture client unit team that focuses not just on innovation, but really on competitiveness. So don't make this a sub-department of innovation, make it an enabler of innovation, but separate from innovation. And once you establish that at the headquarters, don't establish it at a startup hub. If your company's headquarters is not at the hub, go to the headquarters, find the executive sponsor, set up a small venture client unit team, define a set of services for the innovation teams where you support them with finding, sourcing, evaluating, piloting startups, but also start working for non-innovation functions like manufacturing, logistics, IT, correct? And from here on, you grow it out of this initial central seed into a global venture client operation.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions from your side? So thanks, Mateusz. Can also put it in the chat if you want to. Oh, there's a question. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Matthias. So my name is Patricia, and I used to work within like innovation organization at your main competitor in Germany for the last 5 years. And now I moved to a pharma company where I'm also like leading innovation unit. So when Sebastian was answering the question, like, I know how to centralize, you thought this buying from C-level, it's important. And that's true. That my challenge in my previous jobs and the current job was that, it's not, the innovation is not being adopted by the C-level. So C-level usually gives a mandate for this organization to exist, but there is very often lots of resistance and misunderstanding on the business side. It's actually, them who need to incorporate into their process or their product. And very often it's kind of a pain in the back of the body that, someone is coming with the startup and asking them to do additional job because, for them, their power is actually, they find the power expressed by the number of people they're leading and the budgets, right? So do you have what are your, based on the experience which you have from BMW, what are the key success factors to drive adoption of this startup within the business unit?
Well, the key thing is don't talk about startups, talk about what problems can't you solve by yourself. And you go around the company, any unit, whether it's an R&D unit or what have you, and just go to lunch with them and they will complain about all the big problems they're having. They will also talk about the vacation coming up in the next few weeks, but generally they will talk, oh, I can't meet my goals, and no, we got to do this project, oh, we got to launch that product. How do we do this? How we do this feature? How we do that? So always start with a problem. Don't go around and be the sales guy of startups. Start with a problem, and then you say, what if I would find a technology? Don't even use the word startups that can solve that, because why are you solving it yourself, right? You seem not to be able to. You can't solve it by yourself. You can solve it with, I don't know, IBM, Microsoft, what have you. So how about we find some novel companies around there, and you will see that they will open their eyes and will say, yeah, sure. If you have a solution, please knock at my door. So that's really the critical thing, and that's also the mindset. Go out, not promoting startups. And as you said correctly, C-levels do not use startup technology, but you still need C-level support to establish the unit and to give the unit an organizational standing and brand, really. And so it's both a top-down and a bottom-up process to get that going. You need both. But if you don't have the C-level, then start with the bottom. And then I was wondering, who's our main competitor?
Company from the south of Stuttgart.
From the?
From the south of Stuttgart, Mercedes-Benz.
Oh, okay. Well, we are 27 pilots now. We're not BMW, correct? We work for BMW. We work for other automotive companies too, and we actually also worked with Philip some time ago when he was still at Mercedes, and so. But yeah, thanks for your question.
Thank you. And then we have Mark. You have a question, right?
Yes, sure. So thanks both for the interesting content. I have a question. You did not differentiate between the hardware and the software approach. Is there a big difference of introducing startups which are only software based in your portfolio?
Not at that level. Mark, hello to Barcelona. What's the temperature today?
Quite hot, I must say, 33 in Barcelona, but in the interior or in the south even higher for sure.
Well, yes, on this high level which we talked today, the basic framework is the same for hard and software, and generally hardware comes with software. So it's definitely when you go into the depth of the various process steps, When you go to defining the pilot project, then there is definitely a strong difference between hardware and software. The pilot project will likely be longer. The cost of the pilot project will likely be higher. The organizational setting where you have to validate the hardware will be more complex. So yes, and there is a difference, but not on that high level that we talked about today.
Thanks.
Right. Okay, there's a question in the chat. How do you see the differences of this model to corporate accelerators and corporate incubators?
Well, an incubator is generally inside out. It's about I create a company and then I, either establish a separate company from the main company or I make it a product within the company. So that's an incubator generally, but there are also obviously many definitions. But what we see mostly, incubator is about creating companies within a company, and you should do that if there is no startup who can do this better. And you should definitely use an incubator when you see that startups are not active in that realm, and you should potentially also use startups as part of that incubation, correct? Because most of the things you will build in an incubator will not function without startup technology. Accelerators are generally units that help startups become valuable with mentoring and so forth. A venture client does not help startups. A venture client unit seeks the help of startups. The venture client unit provides a direct purchase order and provides a direct technology transfer into the business unit. The accelerator does not do that. There is no purchase order. There is an invitation to the accelerator where the startup spends a few months preparing for a pitch session and a demo day. And after that, maybe they engage in a venture client relationship. So it's a complete difference. And I hope with those few words, I could explain a little bit the difference.
All right, and then as a last question, I think, so who is usually paying for pilots, the venture client unit or the business units?
In the long term, it's the business unit. In the short term, it can be the venture client unit, but in the long term, it should be the business unit. We have seen venture client units where from the very beginning, from the very first day, the business unit paid for the pilot, and the venture client unit provided the structural support and the budget to finance that structural support. So all the activities that you need to do in order to write the business case around the problem, finding the startups, evaluating, piloting them, and so forth. But the payment to the startup is done by the business units, and we see that mature venture client units, this is generally what happens because the venture client has a need, they have a strong need, and they certainly have an incentive to pay for that, and it's also a good sign of commitment and urgency that is very important in the process.
Right. And, thank you very much for all of your questions. I think we are pretty much in time, so I want to end with this slide again, so that you can still scan the QR code or scan the email address, so you can reach out to us. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you everyone for joining. Enjoy your lunch if you're in Europe, and hope to talk soon.
Thank you also from my side, and looking forward to lots of fun activities with the global venture client community.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.